So where we left off in the last video was the beginning of the templating process. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and I'll show you how I did it. So as you can see, I used a very thin sheet of plywood. I believe this would be like a door skin, and essentially I just used that as the main structure of the template. So I could have actually hot glued this to the back of the transom, or what was left of the fiberglass on the original boat hull, but it leaned up against the transom quite nicely, so I didn't have to glue it down. But what I did was I used those door shims for door frames that you pick up from Home Depot or any hardware store. You can buy them in very large quantities. And essentially you're just hot gluing those together. Make sure they're attached very firmly because you are going to be removing this from the boat. But this makes a very nice framework that creates a template that has the outer perimeter of the exact shape that you need. The next step then is just lay that template onto the sheet of plywood that you're going to be cutting it from, trace it out, and then make your cut. You're going to want to put this in the boat where it's going to sit, and then just trim it up as you need to. And I just want to mention that I went with 3/4 inch exterior grade plywood. I did make the mistake of using pressure treated. However, this had plenty of time to sit and dry, and I did soak it in the epoxy quite well before laying on the fiberglass, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I did have to double layer 3/4 inch plywood where the outdrive mounts up. Now you can see, in order to laminate those two pieces, I actually used PL glue and a series of 2x4s, a couple of threaded rods, and some clamps, and just made sure it had good, even clamping pressure. And you just clamp it down and let it dry. And then the next step was just giving it a dry fit and trimming it up as needed. And once I was happy with the fitment, I went ahead and went around to the back, and through the pre-existing hole where the outdrive went, you just trace out the outline. And then I just used the jigsaw and I cut out the hole for the outdrive. And the next step was giving it a solid sanding and just getting it ready for fiberglass. And then you can see here, I just worked one side at a time. I used chopped strand mat and laminated one layer on each side. And because it has to adhere to the old fiberglass transom, you want to make sure you sand it down perfectly smooth. Now, using some scrap wood and 2x4s, I made these large frames, which are just going to work as clamps to apply even pressure. And that is the key, once again, even pressure up against that fiberglass transom. And then I just used some thickened epoxy with some loose fiberglass strand, made it up into a thick peanut butter substance. And I just coated both mating surfaces in that thick peanut butter and then clamped it together. And it worked out quite well. And I do want to add, I definitely needed a helping hand with this because I could not have done this on my own. And this picture jumps ahead a little bit, but what I did was I laid in a 6-inch strip of fiberglass all the way around the perimeter, and I ran it about 3 inches up the new transom board and then 3 inches onto the boat hull, and that just kind of holds it securely in place. And then I continued with 2 full sheets of 1708 across the face of that transom. And then here you can see I finally started laying out some of the stringers. So in order to get the proper height of the floor, what I did was I left a small strip of flooring on either side of the hull, and then I actually used clamps and some string, and I used multiple string lines from one side to the other to determine the height of the floor. And then, using the same templating method as on the transom, I just went ahead and made up my templates for each of the stringers. And I did use an air nailer to connect some sections of these stringers together to just make it easier to glue down into place. And then I just used PL glue and I attached them to the hull itself. And then the tabbing process was very similar to that of the transom. I used about a 6-inch wide piece to connect the stringer to the hull, and then I overlapped that with about a 10-inch wide piece to reach a little bit further up onto the stringer and down further onto the hull, just for some extra strength on those joints. All right, progress so far. All stringers are tabbed in. Next up, I just need to cap over the stringers and then move on to building the engine mount, a couple more platforms, down in the fuel tank, and in the ski locker. Looking good. Now the next step was to add a layer of 1708 fiberglass over the top of all of the stringers, and I also used this opportunity to make sure to tie in all of the stringers together with additional 1708 fiberglass tapping. Next, using 3/4 inch exterior plywood and PL glue, I layered up the engine mount, and then I actually ran a layer of chop strand mat and a layer of 1708 over that before I installed it in the boat. And when it came time to install, I used the peanut butter mixture and I just slapped it on thoroughly to attach it to the boat hull. Okay, let the flooring process begin.